Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Bryant University Alumni Association, welcome to our second webinar of Spring 2019, designed to share professional expertise with members of the Bryant community. My name is Sharday Hunt Shante, class of 2017, and I work in the Alumni and Parent Engagement Office. Today, you will hear from Drew Diskin, a veteran presenter, Bryant alumnus, and member of our National Alumni Council. Our webinar will be moderated by Lori Coakley, Bryant professor, expert facilitator, and co-lead of the Women's Initiative at Bryant. Before we start, let's establish the structure of today's webinar, which will last for approximately 1 hour. All participants are in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to comment, respond to polls, and ask questions using the question and answer feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll answer all questions at the end of today's webinar. After today's presentation, you will receive a survey. Please take a moment to provide feedback. Your comments are valuable as we expand our professional development programs. Now, I'll turn the program over to Lori Coakley, Professor of Management at Bryant University. In addition to being a Professor of Management at Bryant, Dr. Coakley is also a Faculty Fellow for the Hassenfeld Institute for Public Leadership. Her research, teaching, and consulting work center on organizational behavior, leadership, customer service, personal branding and negotiation, and strategic management. She is a certified facilitator in innovation and design thinking.
Thank you, Sharday, and welcome everyone. I am proud to introduce today's presenter, who is Drew Diskin, class in 1995. As a sidebar, I have to say that Drew and I have a history together because he was in my very first class that I taught here at Bryant years ago, although you would never know it looking at me. He has an MS, and he's also an award-winning internet strategist, business development, and marketing professional with nearly 2 decades of experience in creative, integrated marketing strategies with digital, mobile, web, and related technology solutions. Drew is a collaborator and outspoken visionary for focusing on the business objectives for startup ventures, large corporations, and nonprofit organizations. I'm very excited, so let's start today's presentation on customer experiences. Customer experience is your brand.
Thank you, Professor. I have to say I was her favorite student after all these years.
I'm not muted yet.
I want to thank you all for your time today. I hope this is a beneficial webinar for you, and I hope that you will interact with some of the questions we have, engage in the dialogue, and really I'm really humbled to be given this opportunity to kind of share with you kind of what the perspective is from where I sit as an executive responsible for bottom line performance and team development and creating a culture around not only change and innovation, but really about progress and customer success. And so over the last few years, this is the culmination of some of the findings and you could say experience that somebody has sitting on the hot seat on a daily basis. And I'm sure many of you are sitting in the same hot seat in your roles and your careers. And so I'm just taking a perspective from my view, and I'm sure you all have some of your own experiences, and I hope this can create a great dialogue. So again, thank you. So without further ado, just basically focusing on the customer experience, more than just from a support perspective or a service perspective. This is really about who are we as a brand when you look at it from a company perspective, and thinking about the customer experience in that fashion. So I thought I'd start it off with a slide that kind of represents what people see in their everyday lives. So hopefully you can appreciate the humor here. So Gary Coppervos was nice enough to give me permission to use his cartoon. He's a syndicated comic. He's also a brand strategist and close friend of mine. So I could appreciate his work and his candidness, because how often is it that we we have expectations that we think we were promised and we're just not delivered on. So, so much for Father Time here. So I'm sure in your own experience, you've had some similar situations. So this first question out to all of you is, what is the worst customer experience you've ever had? And can you say it in 2 sentences? So think of it as a tweet. I'll give you some time to kind of share that and be honest. All right, so I'll keep moving and you keep typing. And here we can see basically that when we look at the statistical side of business, right? Analytics and data analysis and decisions that are driven by insight data. These are the numbers. If you think about 79% of customers sharing their bad experience with a company, it's very often we hear someone at a airport, for example, and they're missing their flight because the time changed, no one told them, and they're going to go tweet to the world that this is the worst airline ever, the worst experience. And very often we are in situations in business where our customer says, you know, I don't think I'm going to give you guys a great review, and I may even call the Better Business Bureau. And those kinds of threats are real. People do take action. And when people say that they are concerned, they're giving you an opportunity as a business to think about that, because if the numbers are true to 79%, you're at a normal distribution, let's say, and you get that Pareto principle. There's a majority of the people out there that have no problem sharing how frustrated or disappointed they are. So things to think about when working with the customer. And if they're satisfied, they're likely to renew services. It doesn't mean they're going to go tweet to the world that they had the best experience. And if you can capitalize on making them become evangelists for your brand, for your company, and they're able to share a review or maybe tweet out a great experience, that's great. But really where you're going to see the benefit is they're going to keep doing business with you. And if you can all appreciate, as we learned at Bryant, retention is a lot cheaper than acquisition. So looking at this from another perspective, there's some more nerd numbers I thought I would share with you. Those great customer experiences, if you've done well as a business and you've really looked at your customer base, 62% of them are going to come back. They're going to start buying more from that business, and realistically, you're going to see a lot more revenue from that. The retention rates are going to help increase that flow of money back into the business. So it's really important to think of the customer experience is, again, not just service, but it's a way of doing business, and we'll get into some of that framework in a minute. And the loyalty, and there's tons of loyalty programs out there, and there are companies that specialize in loyalty programs as well. And we have some alum that do that, so you reach out to the alumni office if you're interested for yourself. It's not one of mine, one of my colleagues, but I can tell you that there's a lot of value in bringing people back because you've focused in on them as a consumer. All right, so social media. Really, we know today we are looking at the mobile phone more than the TV. We know that people are constantly connected, and they're using social media channels to share, to listen, to learn about their experiences, their lifestyles, the brands they interact with. And when you think about it, I got a lot of numbers here, but basically when you're looking at engaging these customers, you're really thinking about satisfaction is a metric for success. And you can measure that in many ways, but having a social media platform and several channels to work with. Although it may take a little more time, effort, and resources, it is a direct way to engage with your customer base. It's a direct way to listen to what's important to them. And it's a direct way to really be able to surface important matters before it gets out of hand. And so there are services and software companies, resources, and consultants that can help build social media listening tools and strategies around company initiatives or as a complete brand. And it's not the role of necessarily one person in an organization, but it's an organization's role in their relationship with their customers. And so when you look at the retention and you look at the year over year increases, what's that dollar worth? I think this kind of graph kind of encapsulates all of that. All right, moving on. When we think about this in a very simple way, customers are very explicit in what they say they want. And think of yourself. You want things to be easy. You want it now. Speed. Time is of the essence, right? Time is money. Convenience. Don't make me go a little too far for that. I am pretty good with what you have here, but it's got to be convenient for me. I'm not going to go out. I'll go out of my way, but not too far out of my way, right? And price, people talk about that first. It's not always the first thing in their decision making, but it usually comes down to price, more often than not. And so price is important. People say it's got to be a good price, or I can't do it. And the reliability, is what you say you're going to do that, and can I count on that product or service to deliver? And I know you're going to tell me these things, but I'm going to look at the ratings also, because I think more and more, those ratings are going to tell me what you're saying is either true or not. And it's true. People say they want these things. And in a real-time conversation with your colleagues and your friends, just talk about anything. Hey, what do you think about this thing? They're going to talk about it in a different way. They're going to have to talk about their experience. But if you ask them, what would be the things that are important to you if you're going to make a decision to make that choice? They're going to talk about ease, speed, convenience, price, reliability, and probably ratings more than ever. But what they're really saying is really what they need. And so we think about needs in the consumer space, not quite the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where self-actualization is where we want people to feel in a customer experience. We want them to basically to take those wants and convert those to needs so we can deliver on them as a business and as an organization. So what does that really mean? That means timeliness. So time is of the essence, but time has to have a relative component and it has to be delivered in such a way that people feel that it is at the right time, and therefore it can deliver the value, which we'll talk about in a second. Relevance and that personalization. It has to be something that I feel has some value for me, right? So that relevance means that it is something that I'm looking for. So if I'm in the market and I'm shopping for a car and I have a certain lifestyle that I'm trying to furnish a vehicle with, that relevance and personalization, if I'm getting ads for a giant station wagon when I really want is a sports car, that kind of, are you listening to me? That relevance comes together. And value is such an important word, and sometimes it's a little overused, and it means a little bit of everything to everybody. But in the end, value is something that we place on something that kind of takes into context all the content we are receiving. And own system for evaluating all those different things. And then those different things, we place a value on that. And some people have more value in certain aspects than others, and could be completely opposite for the next consumer. And so when we looking at our target markets and the people we serve and our customer base, we really have to think of the value that we represent to them. And it's really important to understand that from an empathetic way, where empathy is the next bullet on the list. Understanding in their shoes, where are they? And where they are may be somewhere along the customer journey. It may be somewhere where they are in their lifestyle. It may be somewhere in their thinking about what it is that they are planning to do or going to do. So along that journey, there could be certain milestones. And so it's really important to map those things. But ultimately, this all kind of culminates in customer experience, how it all gets delivered. And CX is the hashtag of customer experience. I think people just don't have time anymore to type, so they're going to put CX. But CX is one step above UX, which is the user experience, which has more of the digital engagement, but ultimately end to end, from the time I'm looking, listening, and finding out about your product or service on a social media platform, or a colleague of mine is talking about it on a car ride. I wind up interacting with that brand either on a website, or I go into a store, or I make a phone call, or I'm receiving an email because I opted into some white paper that I downloaded not too long ago, and I'm getting some sort of automated email asking me to take the next step. That customer experience goes throughout everything that an organization puts out there. So I'm going to go into this a little more deeper, and hopefully this will prompt some conversation. So to put this in an academic framework, essentially what we've done is taken 5 Ps and alliterated a little bit, and we're going to go into what each one of these mean. And the concept here is that these 5 consumer experience is a framework to look at your organization and others when evaluating what can we do to really enhance that customer experience. Now that the statistics have shown us that this is valuable, it's worth the investment of time and resources, but more importantly, how do we understand what it is we're looking at? So prompt, passionate, professional, personal, and portable. Each one of these things, I have a couple points on I'm going to share with you. And again, hopefully you have some comments from that, and we'll start with our first one. So prompt. This goes back to when people talk about being timely, right? There is something to be said about how often someone responds to an email or a phone call or somebody posting something or a tweet that goes out. And we kind of measure things by how quickly people actually, we think, are listening to what it is we're saying. And sometimes it's a really, you could say, tight deadline. Some people expect an immediate response if they text you. Some people think that if you call on the phone that you're going to return a call in with, let's say, 15, 20 minutes. But if I walk into a restaurant and I'm standing by the hostess and I'm ignored for about 5, 10 minutes, in my expectations of what that promptness is, it's probably not going to be so I won't be so delighted. So we look at that, and in this framework, right, the acknowledgement of what someone is going to do to my engagement. So if I am engaging at that front desk at that restaurant, the fact that someone will say, "Hey, thanks for coming, I'll be right with you," I'm okay with waiting that next 5, 10 minutes, maybe not 15. If someone said, "Look, it'll be about 15 minutes before we can see you," then again, that promptness, I'm still being treated in a prompt way, but the expectations are being set. And so that does matter, right, in a consumer experience. And then when we think about what are some of the greatest needs, let's say it's absolutely freezing outside, and which is very possible. And so I come into that restaurant and they can see that, me and my party, we are shivering, and they said, look, we gotta wait about 15 minutes kind of for a table to clear. How about we bring out some fresh hot coffee and hot chocolate for all of you? That promptness can change that entire consumer experience in that moment. So again, being prompt doesn't mean you may have to be able to solve all the problems, but what you're trying to see is what are some of those greatest needs in this case. Clearly, you're here for food, you're here for the people that you're here with, and clearly you want to have some beverages and something to eat. But it may not be about food, it could be about something else completely. But listening and asking promptly about what those greatest needs are is the way to get there. And again,
Drew,
setting,
before you go
yes.
on, I actually
Mhm.
want to pop in for a minute because we didn't have, I know we had, you asked at the very beginning of the webinar about some questions, and promptness actually addresses one of the first, one of our listeners actually talked about the fact that they had a furniture delivery company that never showed up for the first delivery after the listener waited for 3 hours.
Wow.
He was told he was in the next stop, but still did not come. Second time, the delivery service came early, no notice, and he wasn't there or she wasn't there, and so there was no one there to accept, and so he didn't get the furniture. Finally, by time 3, they finally showed up on time. So when you talk about being prompt, I think this was a great example. So I wanted to interject and say from earlier
Yeah.
in the show, we had a chance for someone to talk exactly about the fact that there was poor communication, no promptness, and a very dissatisfied customer.
So ultimately, right, you have to think, and thank you for sharing that. And ultimately, you have to think, would I go back there again? Given that experience in that moment, does that crystallize the money you spent represented the value you thought you were going to get? It had nothing to do with the furniture. Furniture could have been absolutely perfect, but that experience may or may not have tainted that perception of that brand, that company. And that's exactly what this is about. And so when we think about this, setting expectations, if the furniture company said your window is 3 hours plus or minus, and if we are 2 hours late or 2 hours too early, we're going to knock off, another $50 and send you a rebate. You'd be like, okay, that's cool. Again, setting those expectations versus why don't you just waste 3 hours of your day and we'll get there when we get there. You're our next stop, but you happen to be 2 states away. So that's important. So when you talk about keeping your persona and your organizational positioning, this is more on the outbound side, right? This is not so much as you receiving this as a consumer. This is how you're going to be with consumers, how you're going to be with your customers. And when you look at this and really the experiences that I've had in my career, and I'm sure you with yours, you have an organization that you're representing. And so if you're in an insurance company, you probably may not be kidding around and joking and poking as much. To an extent, if you are working at a company that does, let's say, children's games, right? We have a nice representation of alumni and current students and friends over in Hasbro. They are a great company, period, right? But if they kid around with you a little bit, hey, this is kids stuff, this is a little fun. I may not expect it from, let's say, if someone was an undertaker or mortuary, science major who's now created a practice in dealing with grieving families, probably jokes not so good. You should kind of keep that persona in how you respond to customers and also how you proactively engage them so that customer experience could be great. So I have here just one quick example. Wendy's does a phenomenal job. And mind you, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. These are random. But I can tell you that, Wendy's does an excellent job on social media. They are really engaged. And the part I really want you to think about is not only did they keep their persona, because they're a little more upbeat and funny with their consumer base and their audiences, but look at how quickly they responded. So you have a 1 minute difference They are listening. They are listening to their customers. They're listening to the marketplace, and they have made it a priority to be responsive. And if you go through a lot of the Wendy's social media feeds, this isn't just one that is that quick. They are just that quick. Now, what does that translate to the brand? Well, when you go to a Wendy's, it is a fast food restaurant. So if you think about it, maybe it's things that you should expect from them. It's quick service, which may help them compete with some of the other fast food services that aren't quick. But again, they've done a great job with really embracing this. All right, moving on. Passionate. So being passionate is something that you really can't fake too well. You could try, but people can read that a mile out. So you really have ambassadors of a brand that really do a great job of that. And it doesn't necessarily mean the marketing department. It could be the president. It could be the person who turns the linens at a hospital, because they are truly, truly feeling great about the fact that they're making the room suitable for a hospital guest versus a patient. And so when you think about those things, being passionate allows people to stand behind their products and their services, but it's in a way that's sincere. There's a sense of conviction. And that comes across very quickly to a consumer, a customer, and with that level of sincerity, it really puts a lot more behind what it is that is being shared at that moment. It's not just about the sale, it's about a belief and a vision for that person who's going to be the consumer of that service or product. And from the perspective of really the great brands out there, typically they do very well with their employees. There's no surprise that people who are treated very well do very well in their roles. Most people don't leave their careers, they leave their jobs, and they don't really leave their jobs, they leave their bosses. And they do that because they have not been empowered, they have not been treated well. The expectations on them were not necessarily delivered, and that's a whole other conversation. But more importantly, when you look at how organizations can cherish their employees, and I put cherish there because it's really about embracing people and their skills and their diversity and their ability to kind of share what it is that makes them passionate about what they do at all levels of the business. It's not just on the front end, but the entire business itself. There are passionate people, and so great companies take them and put them forward. And if that's in line with the organization's mission and that message comes across in all those different touch points along that customer journey, that consumer will experience all those different types of engagement from people that really care. And if it's not from people, it's a message. It's in the delivery of the product. It's in the packaging. And there's multiple ways to do that, but that's a whole course, and you'll have to go to Brian or back to Brian for that. So this one's really important. This is important because it's new in the news. It's new because it's not something this company had seen in its many, many years in business of being known as a service organization that was pretty good to their employees and was really good to their consumers, and I believe still is good to their employees, and they still are good to their customers. However, there was a mistake. It was a horrible mistake, never to be repeated. But when you think about that and you look at that experience, how do you as a company take ownership of that? So passion doesn't necessarily mean enthusiasm. Passion also means your sense of commitment and your sense of seriousness and your sense of willingness to do the right thing when the wrong thing's been done. And you can see here that they've taken that opportunity to really take it a step up, hopefully never to be repeated. I live outside of Philadelphia. This stuff is near and dear to my heart and my community. So I can tell you when this incident happened, everybody was talking about it because it's not that long ago where any of us were in any Starbucks in the area. But I saw firsthand how they reacted, just like the rest of you. But living in the community, I see the proactive behavior, and that needs to be addressed. And that is part of passion. So I wouldn't call it a service recovery, as putting passion first and really standing by the right thing.
Drew, it's funny you should bring that up because one of our other listeners, Tracy, was talking about an experience she had with Booking.com. And she said she used to use them a lot living internationally. And she had booked a room for her husband who was traveling during a hurricane. When he arrived, they had canceled the reservation with no reason, no email, no phone call. She tried calling them 3 times, waited on hold at least 25 minutes each time. She said not only was it terrible customer service, they ended up removing her frequent use status, points, etc., with no explanation to this day, and she stopped using them. So when you talk about being passionate, here's someone who really, a company that's not living towards their purpose with this great example.
Yeah, it's a matter of time before that becomes their brand, and whether or not they do marketing or not, it won't matter because those experiences are going to weigh more on consumers as they continue to share those experiences with others. Yeah, and was it worth it? So yeah, and so that's a great segue back to the professionalism piece, right? So being professional, this next P, basically allows a company to be communicative. They are, but usually it's just one way. Communicative does not necessarily mean push. It's just as much pulling in information and listening to what's going on. And if there is a customer who's had a bad experience, how do you communicate with that person or that people or that business? And how do you make that communication really the tether between one organization and another, or one organization and a consumer? So whether it's B2B or B2C, that communication, you will hear more times than not, is the number one reason why someone will not go back. If they had a bad experience, the communication component is probably the number one piece that can help save that reputation or account or customer, or ultimately, in this case, the business from getting a real bad rap. Because if no response is your response, it's probably not a good way to go. This day and age, people are demanding that there is a dialogue. And if there's a dialogue, there's an opportunity to fix something. So that goes to delivering on those promises. So it's very easy for an organization to say they are the best at. In my career, I've heard a lot of executive leaders speak in a way in which what I call the Tigger effect. If you know Winnie the Pooh, Tigger is the only one. And very often I've heard companies have that tone and executives have that kind of message. And with that comes a lot of promises. Now, if they're delivering on those promises, then I guess you could be as verbose as that, but truthfully, doesn't go over too well. But if you're delivering, that's one thing. But not everyone delivers 100% of the time, at least not statistically. So realistically, being able to deliver on promises is really important. So that goes back to the communication component of being professional. And when we talk about that whole where promise and to deliver on that promise, either for whether it be on getting the class that you're going to get because you went to this great school because this is the class you're really excited about and they talked all about it. And if you never get that class, there's a whole spectrum of things that really could have presented that opportunity to you along that journey. And so does the process of the company support that customer journey? Is it complementing that initial, these are the things I'm going after, and these are the things I'd like to have, and these are the things they said I'm going to get? And along that whole decision-making process, there is a process underneath. You could call it the back end of the business to help operationalize all those different touch points and deliverables to really complement that whole piece. And mapping that out is a good way. Having any of the design thinking that Professor Coakley is teaching at Bryant. I think one of the things that when you look at in this kind of ideation phase, it's important to realize that no matter what you think you have as a process, it's okay to relook at it and start fresh and think about if we could do this in a perfect world, and then you can match up to the resources you have. Don't stop yourself from thinking about, what that process could be like versus, well, this is the way we always did things. And, we don't have the money for that, or, we tried that last year and it didn't work. Don't hold yourself back from that, because that professionalism is going to require some of this rethinking.
And I think, Drew, I'm going to jump in on you again,
Yeah.
because I think we had one more comment that fits perfectly here, especially when you talk about the user, as you do with design thinking. Rita had offered this example at the beginning about being with a tour operator who forgot that she worked for travelers and was not the group parent. She said the whole time all she did was yell at members of her group. And so you can tell the impact it had, and some of that lack of professionalism on how people are treated and what they experience, and whether or not then they're going to be a customer in the future.
Absolutely. That professionalism goes a long way. One of the things that I learned in the hotel industry was that the two things people remember the most: number one, how they were treated. So not whether or not the room was filled and they had to go find another one. It was how they were treated was the number one thing. And the second thing they remember the most happens to be the food. So it's not necessarily the location. So following up and measuring, we live in a world today where we can really analyze anything. We can track just about everything. The key is, how do you really make that as a part of the business practice? And it's not just a moment in time, but understanding where that needle is moving. Is it trending in the right direction? But you have to start with a baseline. So I say to most of my colleagues who really are interested in getting started with, like, how do we make things better? I'm going to say you got to start with where you are right now and take a good look of where that is. And you could go backwards a little bit, but you really got to focus on where you are now. And then that gives you a good solid baseline of where you are. And then going forward, you can set realistic expectations. Then you can look backwards and say, we did this much back then, we're now here, but going forward, we want to be somewhere higher, better, more effective. It's okay to be humble and say, this is what we got right now, and we're going to put that down and start there. And there's many ways to get about it, but realistically, that measurement's important. And the following up piece goes back to the communication, making sure people are satisfied. Even if the answer isn't what they needed to hear, wanted to hear, they heard it, and then moving forward from there. And sometimes it's just what you got to do. It's not easy conversations, but it's better than not having one. So right here is a good example. 37 Signals. The company is known for the software platform called Basecamp, which is a project management collaboration tool. It's pretty cool, pretty slick. Work for them. I'm endorsed by them. But what I like is that they are consistently trying to do better. And that is the part I want to say that is most important. It is their professional acumen that makes them, I think, a valuable resource. Because even though it's just software, it's not doing anything. I got to do all the work. My team's got to do all the work. It allows me to do that work, but they're asking how could they do better? And they're giving us honest feedback on how they're doing. And I think that's pretty impressive. So they're being transparent, and there's a lot to be said about that in a professional way. All right, so personal. I'm going to move this along a little bit so we have some more time to talk and chat. This part is important because this is the part we feel. This is the empathy side, right? This is the part we feel that you understand me, you get me. And realistically, in that moment of transacting between, the promise the company's making, the experience the customer is having, and is it real? Is it authentic? Do I really believe in what it is you said you're going to do is really going to benefit me? And it's at that moment of truth. And it's important. So being authentic and real, that's going to help. Being funny and being frank about this is really about knowing your audience. The timing is important, as we talked about, but realistically, if I understand my audience, I can gauge when the timing is. I can get the feedback if this was the right thing, and I can measure later on if it was effective. Being relevant. So when it goes back to saying I'm shopping for a sports car and I'm getting ads for a station wagon, nope, I'm done with those. I've been there, done that. I'm on to the next thing. So being relevant is really important. And so do you understand me as a customer? My name is Drew. You know, there's some famous people named Drew out there. Some are men, some are female. But there is a certain clothing company that keeps on sending me catalogs for women's clothing. It's nice to look at, I guess, but I don't think I'm going to buy anything from them because I don't think those sizes are going to work for me. So CRM driven. Well, everyone talks about customer relationship management now, and it's not just a matter of the database itself or the software you use. There's many out there that are really exciting and do great things, and some of them have an artificial intelligence component. Some of them have, which leads to predictive modeling, and then some of them have, great record keeping, if you will. So all those transactions, you can really understand your customer history. They're all important, but what's really important is that the business is set up to use it as a way of doing business, not just to say we have it and not just to use it as a giant repository. It's to gather insight and to take action. And so CRM driven to me has a lot to do with not just collecting, but acting as well. And then data secured, right? So people, the most important currency right now in the digital age is trust. If I can't trust you with my information, it gets leaked out to companies that are going to spam me. I give you personal information about me. There's a hack into the database of this multi-billion-dollar company, retailer, let's say, and now all my data is exposed. And that really needs to be conveyed and secured. So it's not just the message, but again, in that delivery. That is part of my customer experience. The amount of times that one of my banks has shut down one of my credit cards because of someone getting that number from the hacks to those retailers is something that probably I don't think about too often. And realistically, I know it's going to be every 6 months because that just seems to be the trend. So that data secured thing is like, I don't think about them hacking into it every day, but realistically, every 6 months, I'm having a card replaced because certain retailers don't have that data secured. So along the whole journey, we've talked about this for this whole time. It's at every touch point. We have to think about what that customer experience is. So here's Amazon for me, and I have a house I gotta clean. I have kids I gotta feed. My daughter loves ramen noodles, so I stock up on those. I have like giant pallets being brought into the house, and there's sometimes I'm reading books. But what's amazing is that what's recommended for me is that they understand who I am, they understand where I live, they understand my history, and they're able to understand people like me have bought similar things. And that kind of personal delivery is my customer experience. So yes, they could deliver it to my house within a certain amount of days and all that stuff. That is one part of the experience, and the other part is in the very beginning, whereas they're making my thing easier. So if I want to get more t-shirts, I know I could just click it really easily. I don't have to start over. Again, it's a personal experience. All right, so moving forward, portable. And this one is very easy to understand, right? Because we all live with our phones and we're all on the go, and now the cars are able to sync with the phones, or you don't even need your phone sometimes. You can just talk to your car. That portability of the experience is really ever present now. We talk about the Internet of Things, and we talk about being able to take my information with me, whether it's a Fitbit or it is a personal experience that I had at, you could say, a hotel, and I go travel the world, and I go back to that chain later on. There's a portability with that experience because I know that I need extra pillows, or I like a room outside of, nowhere near the elevator, the stairs. So that is also just as much portable. So that continuity is there. The context is there because it's relative to who I am, but I have an expectation as a customer, and we as business leaders have responsibility to our consumers to make it easier in the mind of our consumer to allow them to do business with us better. And then that's where that value comes back. And so here's an example where one of my care providers, I had a sinus infection a couple of years ago, but the entire experience is on my mobile phone. I can see my entire patient record. Those in the industry know this is an EMR, electronic medical record, but it's not, again, about the technology. It's the high touch. It tells me what I did. It tells me what's next, and I don't have anything coming up because it was just a one and done, but it tells me context of where I was at that moment, and I could look back and I could see what it was that I wound up taking. So in the future, I have the ability now to have this information, and I have it with me, and I could get it from my mobile phone as well as my computer, and I can update it from either way. So again, that portability, to me, this is a great example because it's an organization that happens to really embrace the customer experience, not just saying we're going to do great healthcare, but they continue to deliver that healthcare after that transaction, which happened quite some time ago. I'm much better now, but you never know. It's funny weather out there. So this question is for all of you. So we've talked about the 5 P's: being prompt, passionate, personal, professional. Sorry, got the wrong order. Professional, personal, and portable. So in your opinion, if you had to say which one is the most important one, I'd love for you to share that and give us some feedback, because it's great to get this kind of advice from all of you, and definitely appreciate it. And I'll let you fill that out for a second. And so while that's happening, the next part, and this is really the last part, is how do we get started, right? How does your organization get started with this? You may already be doing this right now as your organization, but either way, really, what do you do with this information now that we kind of shared some of this? So we need to collaborate. And that's something that's, sometimes hard to do. People in different places, and they're in different languages, they're in different time zones. Realistically, though, it's important. And it's not just internal to the company, but external to the customer base. So it is really the exchange of ideas and really thinking about getting that collaboration, knowing that this is a part of the process. And the listening component is really important. It's not just saying we are listening. It's really, you have to be listening. And if your customers are telling you something, it's because they are passionate, not just because your company is passionate. They are passionate, which means they care enough to say something. So that listening component is really important for the getting started part. Take in as much information as you can, because that's going to give you something to start working with. It may lead to the questions you need to ask to what's next. And when we think about consumer experience, we really think of this as a way of doing business. It is no longer a service department issue or a support issue or go fix that issue. It's really about how do we really make the entire experience excellent for our customers and our business partners, our colleagues, even our employees. They are also consumers within the brand, within that company, because it is they who will speak about it, and they are the ambassadors. So it is everyone from the executive to someone who just started right out of Bryant, and they are a specialist, and they got their work cut out for them. They're going to learn a whole lot on the job, but they are too a part of that consumer experience, because they actually may be touching more customers than the executive does. So something to think about in getting started. So the social media piece, to me, is near and dear to my heart. I will tell you, it's a way of doing business. It has to be operationalized. It's not just about the marketing component or the PR component. It is about really how do we do business and leverage the social media channels to help create that exchange between business and its customers. And staff, without them, you can't do much. So really training them and embracing them and making this engagement piece proactive. It's not a static thing. It's always changing. So it's not a one and done type of initiative. It really has to become culturally ingrained, and investing in the right tools and resources. And that's really, to me, the best ways to get started. It's a lot to kind of digest. And I wanted to make sure I had some time for you all. And I have some sources here. And this is where I got some of this information. And I appreciate the internet for sharing. And so I'm sharing back all of this so you can learn a little bit more. And I'm going to leave it with my contact information. I'm happy to be a resource for any of you. And this presentation will be made back for all of you. And I've already attached it to my LinkedIn profile, and feel free to connect. It's in my SlideShare component under my profile as well. And I'm very proud of the fact that obviously I went to Bryant. I got my paraphernalia, and I have my stuff here at the house, where I'm fortunate enough to have enough Bryant memorabilia to probably open up my own bookstore at this point. So I'll leave it to you for some questions, and Professor Coakley, all ears.
Well, thank you. Well, first off, I thought the poll was interesting. You had, of your listeners, you had 36% who thought passion was the most important aspect. And then that was followed by personal. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't. I think it's excellent. One, thank you for responding, everyone. So in sales, where, that's where I cut my teeth, coming out of Bryant, my first job was in sales. You learn the word no pretty quickly. And then you realize no doesn't mean no. No means not yet. Well, no means no outside of business, but in business, no means not yet. And not sure, or I'm not sure why, or not sure why you. And so the number one thing a salesperson has to sell, I learned, is passion. And so passion leads the conversation. It usually closes the argument. You just have to align your passion with the one you're trying to market to. So that makes sense.
I think so.
Yeah.
I have another question for you.
Mhm.
Do you feel that AI or bots are necessary for interaction? Do you think it takes away from the personal nature of the interactions between us and our clients?
Great question. I think AI has a purpose, and I think it depends where. So it goes back to context. I think when people are looking for support, like live support, the AI bots can do some of that work. But I think being transparent is just as important as saying, I am an AI bot. My name is, Mr. Bot, and I'm going to be answering your questions. And at any point you feel that I cannot answer your questions, please click here, and one of our specialists will be happy to work with you. I am here to help save you time and get you answers quickly. Usually people say that's great. I think AI and the automation of understanding what consumers want and what they could be receiving. So AI has a lot to do with the Amazon algorithm, nearest neighbor principle. I think there's a lot of value there. But I think when people are most passionate is when you need to really marry that with really great people on the other end who are also passionate. And then that experience gets crystallized as, what, they did everything they could. And so if it's really personal, keep it personal. If it's further out and not as personal, I think the AI and the chatbots and all that have good value.
Excellent. Another more of a comment, but you may want to reflect on it, is Tracy was talking about, after taking your poll, that she thought that prompt is really the key because she's a real estate professional. And if she doesn't get back to her customer, they'll move to another agent. It needs that immediate response. Do you think then that, as she points out, depending on kind of what type of service or product you provide, that the of the five, that there are different important criteria than, for one professional, like for one it might be prompt, but for another it might be passion?
Absolutely. And I think it definitely depends on this. It's a great point, Tracy. So I think one of the things when you think about being prompt is, how quickly you return that call, or picking it up even and having it forward to your phone. Absolutely. And that's why these 5 Ps are all important, because some of them really are leaning on each other. So I could call you back in 2 minutes and say, what do you want? Yeah, you want a house? So everyone wants a house. That's not very passionate. That's not really good customer service. But I got back to you really quickly. But if I got back to you really quickly and said, oh, thank you so much for calling. I'm so happy that you reached out to me. I have something that I'd love to share with you. I'd love to talk about it. What does your day look like today or tomorrow? That passion comes through right away. And so, but if I came back with that same words I just said a week later, to your point, Professor, it may be too late. That customer definitely could have gone on. So yeah, you have to, these things I think are all interchangeable depending on the industry and the circumstance.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, we're coming to a close, but I do want to at least express from Stacy that she thought that the webinar has been extremely helpful and that she's ready to share what she's learned with her team to inspire them to prove excellent customer service. So on behalf of the Bryan Alumni Association, Drew, thank you so much for this thought-provoking presentation. Most of all, I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today. The entire webinar series archive can be found at Alumni Contact. Oh, no, let me say that again. Alumni Connect, all one word, .bryant.edu/webinars. And if you enjoyed this webinar or you want to suggest a topic for the future, please look out for our survey in your email. Upcoming events can be found at bryant.edu/alumni events. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank everybody. And Drew, thank you again. This was really interesting. We thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and Sade at the alumni office for making this all come together. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.